The last time I drove up to the summer house, the air had smelled like salt and burning rosemary, and I had still believed my family was only normally damaged, the way all families are. This time, the sea smelled sharper, almost metallic, and the road felt narrower. Maybe it was exactly the same as always and I was the one who had changed. I kept one hand on the steering wheel and the other resting on my thigh, pressing down just to feel something solid. The late afternoon light stretched in thin strips across the hood of my car, flickering through the pine trees that lined the cliff road. I remember thinking that I should have turned back the moment my mother said she needed to talk in person. You know that tone she uses, I had told you once, the one where she is overly calm, like she is holding the lid down on something boiling. She had used that tone on the phone 2 days earlier. She had told me I should come up for the weekend, that it had been too long, that the house felt empty without me. I had told her I was busy at work. She had reminded me that work was not supposed to be my entire life. Then, casually, she had added that my uncle was coming too, as if that detail did not belong wrapped in warning tape. My foot had slipped off the brake for a second when she said his name. I do not think she noticed. Now, as I turned off the main road and onto the long gravel driveway, I could see the house perched on the hill above the sea, its white exterior turned a dull cream by years of sun and salt. The shutters were open on the upper floor, pale blue rectangles against the sky. The wind came off the water and pushed against my car, humming faintly through the side mirror. I parked next to my father's old sedan, killed the engine, and sat there listening to the sudden silence ring in my ears. The summer house had always felt like a place out of time. When I was a child, it was where school disappeared and days blurred into a mix of sand, sunburn, and the smell of sunscreen and grilled fish. Later, when I was a teenager, it had been a place of twisted longings and misunderstandings, of shadows on the terrace and late-night whispers from the adult side of the house. After I moved to the city on my own, it became a place I visited less and less, like an old dream I was afraid to examine too closely. The wind caught my hair as soon as I stepped out, whipping it across my face. The air tasted of salt and something faintly smoky, probably from the neighbor's fireplace. I grabbed my overnight bag from the back seat and made myself walk toward the front steps. The wooden boards on the porch creaked in familiar protest under my weight. The smell of damp wood and old stone rose up as I approached the door. Someone had left the outer shutters of the entryway half closed, casting broken stripes of light across the tiled floor inside. When I rang the bell, the sound echoed in the narrow hallway, tinny and too loud, like an alarm in a quiet museum. My mother opened the door almost immediately, as if she had been waiting behind it. She looked smaller than the last time I saw her, or maybe just more compressed, as if stress had folded her into a tighter version of herself. Her hair, once an assertive dark brown, was threaded with more gray than I remembered. She smiled in that way that did not quite reach her eyes and told me I looked thin. I told her I was fine. She reached for my bag automatically, then thought better of it and stepped aside, ushering me in with a wave of her hand. The hallway smelled like it always had, a mix of cleaning products, old books, and the faint ghost of summer meals long gone. Family photos lined the walls, their frames slightly crooked. There was one of me at 7, missing my front teeth, another of my parents holding hands on the beach in winter, their shoulders hunched against the wind. I caught a glimpse of my own face in the small mirror above the shoe rack as I took off my sneakers. Pale, dark circles under my eyes, jaw pressed too tight. I looked like I had not slept properly in weeks, because I had not. My mother told me my father was in the living room watching the news, as if this were a surprising deviation from his usual script. I followed her down the hall. The living room opened up in a wide rectangle, its large windows facing the sea. The light poured in low and golden, hitting the dust motes floating in the air and making them glow. The worn-out sofa faced the television, which muttered some indistinct political commentary no one was really listening to. My father sat in his usual armchair, a glass of something amber on the small table next to him. He turned when he heard us. He told me I was late. I told him the traffic had been bad. He nodded once and said nothing else, his eyes already flicking back toward the screen. That was his way of saying he was glad I was there. My mother fussed around me, asking if I wanted tea, coffee, something to eat. I told her tea would be fine. She disappeared into the kitchen, and I stood by the window, staring at the waves crashing against the rocks below. The water was restless, white foam curling over dark blue. The horizon line looked almost too sharp, dividing the sky and sea like a cut. I realized my hands were shaking slightly. I told myself it was just the drive. My mother came back with a tray, 2 small cups of tea, a plate of biscuits, a bowl of olives. The smell of black tea mixed with the salt air and the faint mustiness of the old upholstery. She set the tray down on the coffee table, her movements overly precise. She sat on the edge of the sofa, knees together, hands folded. My father muted the television but did not turn it off. She told me she was glad I had come. She said it had been weighing on her for too long, that there was something she needed to say, and that this house felt like the only place where she could say it. I asked her what was going on. She glanced at my father, then back at me, and told me that maybe it would be better to wait until later, after my uncle arrived. The word uncle made my throat tighten. I asked her if she meant her brother. She nodded. Uncle Carl. I had not seen him in 12 years. You remember the way I told you about him once, half laughing, half ashamed. How I said he was the charming one, the entertaining one, the one who told stories at dinner and made my mother roll her eyes. How I admitted, in a whisper, that when I was 17, his attention had felt like sunlight and fire at the same time. How I confessed that there had been moments when I was alone with him on the terrace at night and his gaze had lingered a second too long on my bare legs, and I had been too naive to understand how wrong it was and too ashamed to admit how it made me feel. My mother told me he was driving up after work and would be there before dinner. She said she thought it was time the 3 of us talked. I asked what about, but she only shook her head and said we would go in circles if we started without him. I felt my stomach clench. The house seemed to amplify every small sound, the ticking of the old clock on the wall, the wind rattling the shutters, the muffled drone of the muted television. I sipped my tea and tasted nothing. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I excused myself and stepped out onto the small balcony off the living room. The air hit me in a cold slap. The sea stretched out beneath the darkening sky, its surface streaked with silver where the light still touched it. I checked the screen. 2 messages. One from Mia. She had sent a photo of an empty wine glass and the caption that said she hoped I was surviving parental hell. She added that if my mother started in on my life choices again, I should pretend to lose signal and call her. I smiled despite myself. I typed back that I had arrived and that it was already weird. I did not add that my uncle was coming. Somehow, typing it would make it more real. The second message was from Daniel. Not my uncle, a different Daniel. My ex. The word ex still felt raw. He had written that he hoped I was okay. That he had been thinking about our last conversation. That he was sorry for the way things had ended, but he still believed I was making a mistake. He added that if I changed my mind, he would be there. I stared at his message until the screen dimmed. I locked the phone and slipped it back into my pocket, as if I could shove the entire relationship into that small space and keep it out of sight. The memory of his face in the dim light of my apartment the night we ended it flickered through my mind, the disbelief in his eyes when I told him I could not marry him, the way he kept asking if it was about someone else, the hurt when I said it was about me. I had not told him everything. I had not told anyone everything. Not even you. Inside, my mother called my name. Her voice had that edge that meant she thought I was being rude. I took one last breath of cold sea air and went back in. She had already started pulling ingredients out on the kitchen counter, her movements quick and agitated. Onions, tomatoes, herbs, fish wrapped in paper, olive oil glistening in a small bottle. The smell of garlic filled the air as soon as she crushed a clove under the flat side of the knife. She told me I could chop the tomatoes. It was less a suggestion and more an assignment. The kitchen had always been her territory. Growing up, I learned to move around her like furniture, taking up as little space as possible. Now, standing beside her, I felt like a teenager again. I chopped the tomatoes, the red juice staining the wooden cutting board, my fingers sticky with seeds. She asked, in that deceptively casual tone, how work was. I told her it was fine. She asked if the partnership track was still realistic. I said it might be, eventually. She said that for a woman, work was important but not everything, that I should not let my career be an excuse to avoid having a life. I told her I did have a life. She asked if I meant the life where I called off my engagement 3 months before the wedding. The knife paused under my hand. She told me she still did not understand why I had done it. She said Daniel had seemed like a good man, steady, responsible. She implied that I had a tendency to ruin what was good for me. I told her I had my reasons. She asked if those reasons involved another man. I almost laughed. If only it were that simple. By the time we finished preparing dinner, the sky outside had gone from gold to deep blue. The kitchen windows reflected our shapes back at us, 2 women moving in circles around each other, orbiting old grievances and unspoken resentments. My father drifted in to ask when we would eat. My mother told him sharply that it would be ready when it was ready. He retreated with his glass. The knock on the door came just as she was sliding the fish into the oven. 3 slow, measured knocks. My mother froze for a fraction of a second, then wiped her hands on a towel and told me that must be him. My heart thudded in my chest, heavy and uneven. The hallway seemed longer as we walked toward the front door. The sound of the sea grew louder in my ears, crashing and pulling back, crashing and pulling back. The overhead light in the entryway cast a yellow glow on the worn rug. I watched my mother reach for the handle, her fingers trembling just enough for me to notice. When she opened the door, the wind rushed in first, cold and carrying the scent of salt and exhaust from the road. Then he stepped into view. Uncle Carl. He looked older, of course. The last time I had seen him was at a Christmas dinner where he arrived late, already tipsy, and left early after a whispered argument with my mother in the hallway. Back then, his hair had still been mostly dark, his jaw clean-shaven. Now his hair was threaded with gray at the temples, and a few days' stubble shadowed his face. The lines around his eyes were deeper. But the familiar charisma was still there, coiled under the surface like a resting snake. He smiled when he saw me. He told me I had grown into myself, that I looked exactly like he had imagined. The words made my skin prickle. My mother stepped aside to let him in, her smile brittle. He brought with him the smell of cologne and cigarettes and rain. He set down a small overnight bag by the wall and shrugged off his coat. As he did, his eyes flicked briefly to the photographs on the hallway wall, lingering for a moment on the ones of me as a child. Something passed across his face, a shadow, a softness, I could not tell. He reached out and squeezed my shoulder in greeting, just a fraction too long. My body went rigid. My mother must have seen the way I stiffened, because she cleared her throat and said we should sit down. Her voice was tight, almost hoarse. She told us dinner would be in an hour, that we should talk first. My father appeared in the living room doorway then, his expression guarded. He greeted his brother-in-law with a nod, the politeness almost formal. The 4 of us moved into the living room, each choosing our habitual spots as if this were any other family gathering. My mother on the corner of the sofa, back straight, hands clasped. My father in his armchair, slightly angled toward the window. Carl in the empty chair opposite mine. I sat on the other end of the sofa, close to the balcony door, as though proximity to the outside world might offer an escape route. For a few minutes, there was small talk. Work. Health. Traffic. The house. The kind of surface-level conversation people use like a bandage over something festering. My mother kept glancing at the clock. My father kept watching the muted television, though his eyes were not really focused on it. Carl kept watching me. You know that feeling when you can sense someone's gaze on you even when you are not looking directly at them? It was like that. I could feel it like heat on the side of my face. When I did look at him, he did not look away. His eyes were the same pale blue I remembered, soft at first glance, sharper when you held them too long. Finally, my mother took a deep breath. She told us she could not pretend this was a normal visit. She said she had asked me to come, and she had asked him to come, because there were things she should have told us years ago. She said she was tired of holding everything together with lies. My father shifted in his chair but did not interrupt. My mother's hands were shaking so badly now that she laced her fingers together and pressed them against her knees. She looked at me first. She told me that much of the life I thought I knew was true, but not all of it. She said there were things about my birth, about how our family came to be the way it is, that she had kept hidden because she thought she was protecting me. She said she realized now that she had been protecting herself. The word birth lodged like a stone in my throat. My mind leapt, unbidden, to all the smallest inconsistencies I had noticed over the years and pushed aside. The strange way my mother always changed the subject when I joked that I looked nothing like my father. The way my aunt, her younger sister, used to get quiet whenever my mother and I walked into a room together. The fact that my uncle had always been around in my earliest childhood memories, and then suddenly, one day, he was not. My mother turned to Carl then, as if asking for help. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. He told me that he had made many mistakes in his life. He said one of his biggest mistakes was leaving without explaining anything. He said he had convinced himself that staying away was the least harmful option. He said he realized now that he had been a coward. I told them both I did not understand what they were talking about. My voice came out too loud, too tight. The room felt smaller. The sea, visible through the window, kept moving. My father finally spoke. He told my mother to just say it, that dragging it out was cruel. He kept his eyes on the dark screen of the muted television as he said it. My mother swallowed hard. When she looked at me again, her eyes were shiny with unshed tears. She told me that the man I had always called my father had raised me, loved me in his way, provided for me. She said that would never change. Then she said that biologically, things were more complicated. My stomach dropped. There was a roaring in my ears, like the sound of the waves suddenly magnified. I asked her what she meant, but I already knew there was only one thing she could mean. She said that when she was younger, when she and my father were going through a particularly hard time in their marriage, she had made a terrible mistake. She said it started as comfort, as a shoulder to cry on, as late nights on the terrace with too much wine and too little sense. She said she had told herself it meant nothing, that it would end quickly. She said it did not end quickly enough. She could not look at me when she said that during that time she had been with someone else. That she discovered she was pregnant and could not be absolutely sure who the father was. That she had chosen to believe it was her husband, because the alternative would have destroyed everything. The air in the room thickened. Carl sat very still, his eyes on the floor. My father's knuckles were white around the armrests of his chair. I felt like I was floating above my own body, watching the scene from the ceiling. When my mother finally forced herself to say my uncle's name, linking it to that time in her life, to that mistake, to that pregnancy, to me, something inside me cracked in a way I could almost hear. She told me there was a strong possibility that Carl was not just my uncle. She told me he might be my biological father. The word might felt thin, like paper trying to cover a hole in the ground. My vision blurred around the edges. The room tilted. For a second, I thought I might be sick. I grabbed the edge of the sofa to steady myself. My fingers dug into the fabric. I looked at Carl then, really looked at him, and saw in his face, suddenly, a dozen small details that matched mine. The shape of the jaw. The line of the nose. The way one eyebrow arched slightly higher than the other. It all clicked into place with sickening ease. Uncle. Father. Both. Neither. I could not breathe. Before anyone could say anything else, before they could start apologizing or explaining or reaching for me, I stood up. The room felt too small, my skin too tight, my heart too loud. I walked past them, past the tray of half-drunk tea, past the muted television, down the hallway lined with family photos that now felt like a crime scene, and out onto the porch. The wind hit me hard, nearly taking my breath away. The sky had darkened to a deep indigo, the first stars faintly visible above the horizon. The sound of the sea was louder out here, crashing against the rocks below in a relentless rhythm. The cold air burned my lungs as I sucked it in. Behind me, I heard the muffled sound of my mother calling my name. The word sounded wrong now, like it belonged to someone else. I stepped to the edge of the porch and gripped the railing, my knuckles pale. The wood was rough under my fingers, splintered in places. I stared down at the waves, white foam leaping against the dark stone. In that moment, all the scattered pieces of my life flew through my mind at once, the way my uncle's gaze had made me feel at 17, the way my mother always tensed when we were alone together, the way my father sometimes looked at me with an expression I could never quite decode. The broken engagement. The secrets. The half-truths. I realized, with a bolt of nausea, that the one man I had always kept in a separate, uncomfortable corner of my memory might not have been just an uneasy presence in my adolescence. He might have been my father the entire time. And whatever else my mother had called me here to confess, I had the sickening feeling that this was only the beginning. I stayed outside longer than I intended, gripping the railing so tightly that my fingers began to ache. The waves crashed below in violent bursts, each one sounding like a warning, like the sea itself was trying to keep me from going back inside. The air smelled of cold salt and something metallic, almost like blood. I kept swallowing hard, trying to steady my breathing, but my chest felt tight and narrow, as if someone were pressing down on it from the inside. At some point, I heard the door open again behind me. Not wide, just a crack. My mother's voice drifted through the gap, small and trembling. She asked me to please come back in. She said she knew it was too much. That I deserved to be angry. That she understood if I hated her. The words reached me in fragments, carried unevenly by the wind. I couldn't bring myself to answer. Eventually the door closed again, leaving only the rhythmic crash of the sea at my back. When I finally went inside, the house felt different. Heavier. As if the walls were absorbing every emotion and sweating them back into the air. My father was still sitting in his armchair, but his face was turned away toward the window, the muscles in his jaw tight. Carl sat very still, elbows on his knees, eyes trained on the floor. My mother hovered near the doorway between the living room and the kitchen, wringing her hands like she was trying to crush the truth she'd just released. I sat down on the edge of the sofa, as far from Carl as possible, feeling the cushion sink under my shaking weight. The silence pressed against my skull, thick and suffocating. My father cleared his throat, but no words followed. My mother opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. It was Carl who finally broke the stillness. He leaned forward and told me he never intended for any of this to come out this way. He said he had tried to stay away. That he had convinced himself it was the right thing to do. That if he stayed gone, maybe the secret would stay buried forever. The sound of his voice made something cold and sharp twist inside me. My hands curled into fists before I even realized it. My mother told him not to speak like that, not to make it sound noble. She said the truth was messier than that. She said he had vanished not just to protect me, but to protect himself, because facing what he had done would have destroyed every relationship in the family. I could tell she was fighting the urge to cry. My father rubbed his temples, his voice low and hoarse when he finally spoke. He said he had forgiven her years ago, long before I was old enough to sense anything had been wrong. He said they had agreed never to tell me, believing that ignorance would offer a cleaner life. He said they had been wrong. All of them. The air felt thick with half-confessions and unprocessed guilt. I asked the only question I could manage, how certain they were. My mother said almost certain, her voice cracking on the first word. She said the timing matched. She said she had known deep down for years. She said she had looked at me sometimes and seen him in the shape of my face, the angle of my jaw, the way my eyes narrowed when I didn't trust something. She said she tried to ignore it. She said she convinced herself it didn't matter. I felt something hot and sick rise in my throat. Carl lifted his gaze then, finally meeting my eyes. There was something in them I didn't want to read. Regret. Shame. Something darker too, something I could not yet name. He said he had suspected it for a long time. He said the guilt had chewed at him for years. He said he had tried to reach out once, when I was young, but my mother had begged him not to. He said he respected her wishes. That was the story he chose to tell. I wasn't sure I believed all of it. My father said nothing. The feeling of betrayal spread inside my chest like a slow poison. I asked him directly why he had stayed. Why he hadn't left my mother. Why he had raised me knowing I might not be his daughter. He finally looked at me then, and the exhaustion in his eyes startled me. He said that loving me had never felt conditional. He said he chose to stay. He said he chose me. The simplicity of his answer cracked something soft inside me, even through all the chaos. My mother wiped her eyes and whispered that she wanted us to have dinner, that she wanted to sit together, that the truth had finally been spoken and maybe now something new could start. The idea felt absurd, almost insane. My father stood and went into the kitchen without a word. Carl followed him, moving slowly, as though unsure of his right to still be in the house. My mother lingered near me, her hands hovering like she wanted to touch my arm but didn't dare. She said she hoped someday I could forgive her. She said she knew it would take time. She asked me to please stay the night. I told her I needed some air. She nodded, swallowing her disappointment like a stone. I walked outside again, the wooden boards cold under my feet. I paced along the balcony, the sky now a deep navy, the stars scattered in thin clusters. I pressed my hands against my face, trying to block out the image of Carl's eyes meeting mine across the living room. Something inside me recoiled every time I replayed that moment. I thought of Mia. Of calling her. Of hearing her say something casual and grounding like she always did. But how do you even begin a conversation like this? Hey, guess what? The uncle I once felt uncomfortable around might actually be my father. How do you say that without your own voice sounding unreal? My phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't check it at first. When I finally pulled it out, the screen lit up with a single message. Daniel. The ex I'd left behind. He asked if I arrived safely. He asked if things were okay. He told me he missed me. His message felt like a hand reaching through fog, warm and familiar. But I couldn't let myself lean on that familiarity, not now. Not with everything else spiraling. I slipped the phone back into my pocket without replying. I stayed outside until I heard dishes clinking faintly through the open kitchen window. Voices murmuring. Chairs scraping. My mother calling my name again, this time more softly. When I went back inside, they had set the dinner table. The fish smelled incredible, lemon, garlic, herbs, but my stomach twisted at the thought of swallowing anything. My mother told me to sit. My father poured wine into 4 mismatched glasses. Carl took the seat across from me. The candlelight flickered on the table, casting soft shadows on his face. I looked down at my plate, my fork untouched. My mother tried to make conversation. Asked if I remembered the beach days we used to have. Asked if Carl remembered teaching me how to skip stones across the water. He said he remembered. His voice was gentle. Too gentle. Something in me flinched. My father remained mostly silent, his expression unreadable. The silence between bites grew thicker. The room felt too warm. The smell of herbs too strong. The candlelight too intimate. My chest too tight. At one point, Carl said my name softly. I froze. He told me he wanted me to know he never meant to, something. I never heard the end of the sentence. I stood up so abruptly the chair leg screeched against the floor. My mother called after me, panic creeping into her voice. My father rose halfway from his seat. Carl stood too, but slowly, cautiously, like he knew any sudden movement might send me running into the night. I told them I needed to leave. My mother said I shouldn't drive like this. She said it was dangerous. She said we weren't done talking. She reached for my arm but let her hand drop before touching me. My father said nothing, but the pain in his eyes hit me hard. Carl took a half step toward me before stopping himself. I grabbed my bag from the hallway. My hands were shaking so badly that I nearly dropped my keys. As I pulled open the front door, my mother's voice cracked as she called after me again. She said there was more I needed to hear. I didn't turn around. The cold night air hit me like a slap as I stepped outside. I made it down the stairs, across the gravel, and into my car before the weight of everything finally crashed onto me so hard I couldn't breathe. I sat gripping the steering wheel, my forehead pressed against my hands, my breath catching in small, painful bursts. I thought I had heard the worst already. But the way my mother's voice had broken told me something terrifying. There was still more. Something she hadn't said. Something she was afraid to say in front of my father. Or in front of Carl. And for the first time since arriving at the summer house, I realized this wasn't just a confession. This was the beginning of something much darker. I sat in the car for several minutes, the cold air leaking through the cracked window, numbing my cheeks. The sound of the waves climbed the cliff in long, dragging breaths, filling the silence inside the vehicle. My hands were still trembling around the steering wheel. My heartbeat felt too loud, like it was echoing inside a metal chamber. I didn't want to drive. I didn't want to stay. I didn't want to know more. And yet I knew I couldn't leave. Not truly. Not with my mother's last sentence burning inside my skull like a live wire. There is more. There is more. There is more. The headlights of another car swept across the gravel behind me. The beam hit the trees, then the side of the house, then faded. My father's silhouette appeared at the top of the steps, watching me. He didn't move. Didn't call out. He just stood there, a dark shape against the yellow porch light, as if he understood that whatever came next was something he wasn't part of. It was my mother who appeared next, her arms wrapped around herself. She didn't go down the steps. She stayed on the top one, shoulders hunched against the cold. I could see her breath rising in small clouds. She didn't call my name. She just waited. And somehow, that felt worse than any plea. After another long minute, I pushed the door open and stepped out, the air slicing through the heat inside the car. Gravel crunched under my shoes as I walked back toward the house. My legs felt stiff, almost mechanical. My mother turned and walked inside without a word, leaving the door slightly open behind her, as if she knew I was following. The hallway felt warmer than before, almost suffocatingly so. My father had retreated to the living room, staring at the muted screen again. Carl stood by the kitchen doorway when I re-entered, his hands in his pockets, his posture tight. The tension in the air was so thick it felt like walking through steam. My mother gestured for me to follow her upstairs. That detail alone sent a cold spike down my spine. The serious talks in my family never happened upstairs. Upstairs was bedrooms, childhood, privacy. Going there meant this was something deeper. Something that required walls. Something that couldn't be spoken within earshot of either man downstairs. She led me into the guest room, my old room from when I was little. The moon reflected off the sea through the window, washing the bedspread in a pale glow. She sat down on the edge of the bed. I remained standing. I didn't trust myself to sit. My mother told me she needed to tell the rest of it in private. Her voice shook so badly she had to inhale between every few words. She said she didn't want anyone else to hear, especially Carl. Especially my father. She said the truth wasn't only about my biology. She said it was about something that happened when I was older. Something she had suspected but never confirmed. Something she had buried because she didn't think I remembered. My skin went cold. She said there had been a night, the summer I was 17, when she had woken up and found the back door slightly open. She said it was late, maybe past 2 in the morning. She said she had checked the terrace, the kitchen, the hallway. She said she had found me sitting outside on the stone steps, barefoot, your hair damp with night mist, your body stiff as a board. I felt my breath stutter. She said she had asked me what I was doing outside. She said I looked dazed, unfocused, like someone waking from a deep sleep. She said I mumbled something she couldn't understand. She said she helped me inside, wrapped a blanket around me, and took me upstairs. She said I fell asleep almost immediately. My hands were numb now. She said she had gone downstairs afterward and found Carl coming out of the laundry room. She said he looked startled to see her. She said he explained that he had been looking for a clean towel. She said he went back to bed without asking anything. She said she hadn't thought much of it then. Not until later. Not until she started piecing together small details, my sudden change in mood that summer, the way I avoided Carl's gaze, the way I flinched when he touched my shoulder, the way I insisted on keeping my bedroom door locked at night. She said she had asked me once if anything had happened. She said I told her no in the most rehearsed tone she had ever heard come out of my mouth. I felt a wave of nausea crash over me. I told her I didn't remember that night, at least not clearly. I told her I remembered sitting on the steps sometimes, because the summer heat made it hard to sleep. I told her I remembered Carl smoking outside late at night. I told her I remembered him sometimes offering me wine when my parents weren't looking, laughing about it in a way that made me uncomfortable. I told her I remembered his gaze. Her face collapsed when I said that. She said that when she realized the possibility, she confronted him. She said she asked him what he had been doing out of bed that night and why he hadn't mentioned seeing me outside. She said he brushed it off, said I was half asleep and probably confused, said nothing had happened. She said she wanted to believe him. She said she needed to believe him. I asked why she was telling me now. She said because the possibility of him being my biological father made everything that happened that summer something she couldn't keep buried anymore. She said the combination of the two truths, the genetic one and the behavioral one, forced her to see what she didn't want to see. She said she wasn't sure if he had ever crossed a line with me, but she feared it. She feared it deeply. And she had feared it alone for years. My legs felt unsteady. I gripped the windowsill to keep myself upright. My mother's voice broke as she said she had lived with that fear in silence, fear that he might have taken advantage of the confusion that summer, fear that his feelings for her had blurred into something twisted when it came to me, fear that he had watched me in ways no adult should watch a teenager. I whispered that I didn't remember anything like that. She asked if I was sure. I wasn't. Not fully. Because now that she had said it, fragments shifted inside my mind like dust swirling in light, the smell of tobacco on my skin some mornings, the way I sometimes woke up confused about how I had fallen asleep, the sound of footsteps in the hallway that I always told myself were just the house settling, the way I felt watched that entire summer. A cold shiver ran down my spine. My mother told me that wasn't even the worst part. My lungs froze. She said she had recently learned something about Carl from someone in the family she trusted. She said she wasn't supposed to hear it. She said it was about his past, before he ever married her sister, before he became the charming uncle everyone adored. She said he had done this before. To someone else. To a girl younger than I had been. In a different town. A long time ago. Covered up by the family. Quieted. Forgotten on purpose. My heart dropped so violently I had to sit down. My mother told me she had been too horrified to believe it at first. Then she told me that everything about his behavior suddenly made horrible, perfect sense. She said she invited him here because she needed clarity, needed to face him, needed to tell me everything in a place where she felt I was safe. Only I didn't feel safe. Not in this room. Not in this house. Not with him downstairs. The room felt smaller. The air heavier. The sea louder. I forced myself to stand. I told my mother I had to leave the house immediately. She told me she understood. She told me she would keep my father downstairs. She told me she wouldn't let Carl follow me. She told me to pack my things quickly. I didn't pack. I grabbed only my bag from the hallway, my phone, my keys. I kept my head down as I passed the living room. I didn't look at Carl. But I felt his eyes on me like two needles between my shoulder blades. My father said my name softly, but I couldn't answer. The cold night air hit me hard as I stepped outside. I walked fast across the gravel, my breath sharp, my hands shaking. I opened the car door, slid inside, locked it instinctively. Through the windshield, the porch light cast the house in a pale glow. And then, Carl stepped into the doorway. He looked directly at me. Not confused. Not concerned. Not apologetic. He looked like he understood exactly why I was leaving. And he didn't seem surprised. A cold realization slid down my spine. My mother wasn't afraid of the past. She was afraid of what he might still be capable of. I turned the key, the engine roared to life, and I drove away from the summer house as fast as I could without sliding off the cliff road. My vision blurred with tears, the headlights carving trembling lines through the dark. When I reached the main road, my phone buzzed. One message. From my mom. Just 3 words. He's denying everything. Then, another message, seconds later. Please don't shut me out. I need you. I pulled over onto the shoulder because my hands were shaking too hard to drive. The sea roared below. The sky pressed down from above. And for the first time in my life, I realized the truth wasn't the twist. The twist was this. The person my mother feared most was the same man she believed might have fathered me. And the same man she feared might have touched me. And the same man who had done it before. The truth wasn't one secret. It was all of them stacked together. And the final, cruelest thought that crossed my mind. I wasn't sure I had escaped him at all.